Welcome to the broadcast. This is Michael Easley inContext. If you were to come to Middle Tennessee and wander into any number of Puckett's restaurants, you just might see a gentleman, very unassuming, walking around talking to employees and customers, and probably a musician on a stool playing a guitar or two. And the most laid back, unassuming, humble, kind man you'll ever meet is Andy Marshall. Andy is the founder and CEO of Marshall Hospitality. It's a restaurant management group here in Middle Tennessee and expanding beyond, as we'll learn. He oversees about 400 employees. When Cindy and I moved to Middle Tennessee 16 plus years ago, we visited a Puckett's restaurant, as someone recommended, and felt like we'd come home. It's a great Southern home-cooked food, everything from pulled pork to turnip greens to evil cobblers and pies and all the kinds of things that your Southern grandma might have made. Andy has restaurants in Franklin, Nashville, Columbia, Chattanooga, Murfreesboro, and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, if you know a little bit about our history. He also owns a group that is Americana Tap House in downtown Franklin, Burger Daddy in Franklin as well, Puckett's Trolley, which you can envision what that's like. They also have a catering and event division. He has Scouts Pub in Franklin, Tennessee, as well as my favorite, Deacon's New South, which is a fabulous steakhouse in downtown Nashville. I'm not going to read his CV and Vita, because if I do, that's all I'll do is read all the accomplishments and achievements that Andy has received over the years. He is a treasure in Tennessee. I will tell you, he's been recognized by every restaurant association, the governors of Tennessee, and so forth. But I first met you, I think, at the Franklin restaurant. It's when I think you took over the boathouses, and our friend Jay Seculo and I were having lunch, and you walked over, and it was Joe Davis and Jay and I, and we first time we had met, and we've had the fortune to be together a number of times over a meal. But I wanted folks to hear a little bit about your story. I was blown away. One night we were at a friend's house, and I just asked about how you came to Christ and got in the restaurant business, and I was just sat there shocked, and I thought, we got to have Andy on the podcast. So first of all, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here.
So
Yeah, I look forward to sharing my story.
yeah, talk about the young Andy that people don't know, walking around Middle Tennessee, probably barefoot with a fishing pole and a bicycle.
Well, more like asphalt with worn out tennis shoes, but
Okay.
I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and lived there till I was 12 years old, and then softly landed in Middle Tennessee and been here in Franklin ever since. But yeah, so the young Andy Marshall was for the most part a good kid with very little guidance in life, which led to making some big mistakes at a very early age, and so God had to deal with me and dealt with me kindly.
Well, now you say softly landed. Tell people about a little bit about your story, because when you told me, that's what my mouth dropped up. You were basically on your own.
Yeah, so raised by a single mom for most of that time. She remarried, and during that period of her remarrying, our family kind of fell apart. She she was a heavy drinker, to say the least, and then became an alcoholic under the tutelage of her new husband. And unfortunately, it kind of broke up our family. My brother, who was 7.5 years older than I am, he left the house at age 15. Actually, one summer we were spending with my dad, which we 1 week a year, and he just refused to go home. And I didn't understand at the time. I was 7 years old, and just didn't quite understand what was going on. Then my sister, who's 4 years older than me, she became a runaway at age 13, and it ended up being really tragic, because she later died of hepatitis from the hippie days of the 70s. And here's a 13-year-old girl living on the streets and hitchhiking across America, and she later got her life together, thank God, but it paid a toll on her life. But And I didn't quite understand that either, until they were both gone, and then it became my turn to be picked on and abused, and I just unfortunately got to the point where I was trying to connect with my dad, and had not quite made that connection. And he kept encouraging me to stick it out, and I could make it work. And I knew I was just kind of at my wit's end, but and so I was searching for a savior. I was looking for it in all different places, and trying to find that comfort. And so over the years, I was just kind of trickled on about God. I'd never went to church, didn't know much about it. I knew my grandmother was a Christian. She had given me a Bible when I was 12, and wrote in there, some words to live by in Micah. And so I kind of held on to that Bible, trying to figure it out. And little by little, strangely enough, my stepfather was he was a con artist, and he was conning churches into building projects, and I didn't know it at the time. Kind of figured it out later. But I went to those work sites with him, and it was mostly the Black heritage type churches that he would con. Yeah, but those ladies would take me in when I was on those work sites, and they would drip and love on me, and share the gospel, and some of that really stuck in with me at my most, I guess, troubling time. But what kind of led me to the Lord is I was picked up by a police officer on the streets of Memphis, and he said, "Hey, where do you live? I'll take you home." And he took me to my house, and nobody was there, and it was, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and he said, "Well, I want to take you to a place where you could better spend your time." And he introduced me to the Boys and Girls Club, and he said, this is a better option for you." And then later picked me up from Boys and Girls Club and took me to my house, and had a conversation with my mother, and said, streets of Memphis are no place for him. It needs to be somewhere safe. And so he kind of gave her the ultimatum that I was going to end up in jail at a very young age, or I could be spending time at Boys and Girls Club. And so that kind of started my relationship there. And again, some biblical basis to what Boys and Girls Club was doing, although it's not necessarily a Christian organization, but they were certainly pouring into me, and kind of started my foundation. But unfortunately, when I was 12 years old, and my stepfather gave my mother an ultimatum, said either he was leaving or I had to go. And so my mother looked at me across the table and said, "Do you have anywhere to go?" And so, yeah, I called my dad, and had a conversation with him. And unfortunately, on the other end of the line, he was saying, "Son, I can't take you in. I just can't do it right now. Just figure it out, work it out." And so I hung up the phone, and I told my mother that he was coming to pick me up, but he didn't want to come to the house. He didn't want a confrontation, that he would pick me up at my friend's house. And she said, "Okay." And she helped me pack my bag, and I left. Some 4 days later, my dad called to check on me, and my mother said, "I thought he was with you." And he said, "No, I had explained to him I couldn't take him at this time." And she said, "Well, I know where he's at if you want to come talk to him." And so he came and picked me up at my friend's house, and he brought me back to Franklin. And so that kind of reset my life. And I decided at that point that I was just going to be a different kid. I was going to take this opportunity, and I was going to make good of it. And I was in the midst. About 30 days before all this happened, I had turned my life over to the Lord at Southland Baptist Church in Memphis, Tennessee. I walked into those doors, and just trying to figure out what this all was about, Jesus. And
you were 13.
I was 13. I just turned 13.
So you were, people, especially knowing you're a very humble individual. You're not going to talk about it, but you had to be a pretty bright individual to put together the home situation, what you needed to do, and then even to be interested in spiritual things at age 13.
I've always been a pretty introspective type person. And so I knew there was something better. I just knew it. And, I was trying, I put a lot of trust in my brother as a very young boy, and then my sister, bless her heart, she looked after me and took care of me and did all she could for me. Even later, when I got in business, she helped me with my accounting and just stood by my side and everything. But
Wow.
I looked forward to my dad, but I was only seeing my dad 2 weeks a year, and that I had built up this image of a father that was hard for him to live up to, and so little by little did I find out there was only one true person that I could trust, and when I gave my life to Christ, it all changed everything, changed my perspective, my outlook, my attitude, and I know it's supposed to. They tell you it changes slowly over time, but for me, I just took it and ran with it, and I just buried myself into the Bible and tried to figure it out.
You and I are old enough to look at these. I like to look at decades and how people respond to things. And your and my generation, I think the work ethic we came from, even some of the hardships that you experienced, certainly. What's your diagnostic? Because it seems like those of us, we kind of, you went and did the next thing. You went to work. You found a job. I swept the floor of a barbershop. I shined shoes and boots for 35 and 50 cents. That was what we did. But today, throwing those same experiences, kids are very different the way they respond. They're victims. They're certainly hurt. But if you had any diagnostic on that, and you employ a lot of people, which means you've had to fire a lot of people over the years, have you made any observations from a high level of why it's so different, Andy?
Well, I don't know that I'm smart enough to give the intelligent answer on that, but from my perspective, we were raised in a different generation. Our parents, my parents worked. My mother and stepfather both were workers, and I saw that, but I was left on my own. So I learned how to cook. I learned how to do the laundry. I learned how to go out and collect bottles to get cash to buy food for the house. I just, you just did what you had to do. And even when I started my business, a lot of people want me to mentor them, and they want to start where I'm at. They want to know, how do I do what you do? And what they don't want to hear is that, for the first 8 years in Leipers Fork, I got up at 3 o'clock every morning and I was making biscuits at 3:30, and I did that every single day with nonstop, and it wasn't until somebody said, "You're always here. Do you ever take a vacation?" Did I ever even think about it, because I had to build a business, I had to provide for my family. In today's, youth, even my own children, sometimes I tell Jan that, my wife, that, did we do wrong? Did we make it too easy for our own children? But every generation wants to do that. Every generation wants to make it better for the next generation. And, we tried to instill work ethic into them, and we sometimes felt like we didn't do enough or failed. And then my daughter in college writes me a letter and thanking me, for the work ethic we instilled into them, and how she sees it around other people in college, how they won't even go to class or do their work, and how they're ever going to accomplish anything. And she wrote us a beautiful letter thanking us for making her work in our business, and, picking up rocks in the yard, because that's what you do when you're in the country. And, everybody had jobs to do. So, we thought we didn't do enough, but apparently some of it stuck.
Well, none of us are, I think we all have buyer's remorse when it comes to parenting, wish we'd have done it differently. But the work ethic, I've maintained, to me, that was the seminal fault line, was that there wasn't we had kids when we moved here to Middle Tennessee in the Brentwood school systems, and I made them have I said, we'll help you with the car, but you will have a part-time job for gas, because I'm paying for most of the car and the insurance. And if you want to go to youth group and church and school, great. Beyond that, you got to put gas in that car. Oh boy, the rebellion of, no one else in Brentwood had to work, and they weren't far from wrong. Most kids didn't work, but I would say all of them came back at one point and said, thanks for making us work and learning the value. But it's interesting. And it's, again, you don't want to be an ogre and you do want to bless your kids, but it's that pain versus gain and anyway, I digress.
Almost that my kids never were as hungry as I was at one time.
I'll have to remember that one. You were never as hungry as I was. Well, talk about Leipers Fork. For those that don't know Middle Tennessee, in those days, Leipers Fork was probably a pretty remote farm area.
Yeah, so I had owned and operated grocery stores, and I had built it up to 4 grocery stores, and a lot of that was following my dad and trying to be the proverbial, good son, and
So he was a grocer? Your dad was a grocer?
He
Okay.
was, yeah. He worked from Lone and Hyde, which back in the old days was a premier grocery wholesaler that also owned some grocery stores. And he was moved from Memphis to Franklin, and to open up the giant food stores. It's even before your time, but it was the first giant grocery stores, and people would, line up on the street to get in it because it was so new and unique. But anyway, he was a fine grocerman and great reputation, and I wanted to mimic that, and started working in the grocery business when I was 14 and worked my way all through it. But at age 26, I bought my first grocery store, and along the path of growing that business, I got to the point and pinnacle of my career, and just looked up and said, where is this going? I was about 35. My dad had passed from a tragic accident, and so I didn't have that driving to, please him like I once had. And I thought, I'm just going to get rid of these and do something different. Found this little country grocery store in Leipers Fork that 2 people called me about within a week, and I'd never really heard of Leipers Fork. I grew up in Franklin, but I knew it as Hillsboro, and I was like, where is this Leipers Fork everybody keeps talking about? Well, it had a name change, and it was in the midst of, under Aubrey Preston's tutelage, of kind of rebranding itself as a community. And Aubrey had heard that I'd heard about it, and I knew the grocery business, and would I come and look at this little country grocery store? And I did, and I just fell in love with the community first. I thought, you know what? If nothing else, this will be a great little hobby project for me. I'll make it a cool little country grocery store. I'll hang a gone fishing sign up when I want to go fishing, and none of that happened. So I ended up buying it, and then I had to figure out how to make a living out of it to provide for my family, and as entrepreneurs do, good is never good enough. You have to keep pushing and try to find ways to do it better. And so Leipers Fork was kind of all consuming, but man, what a great time in our life, that community and raising our kids out there. And, what a great safe place for my kids to come work and enjoy being part of the family business, but at the same time, living in a really cool community where everybody just loved on them and treated them so well.
You didn't lock your doors and left your keys in the car in those days, didn't you?
That's right.
Now talk about that, because that grocer, it was called Pucketts, correct?
Yeah, it was. It was a little country grocery store. I actually knew Leon Puckett from the grocery business. He and I were on a grocers board together. And I knew his family had all these little country grocery stores kind of dotted out around Middle Tennessee. And they were all designed as little country grocery stores. So Leipers Fork was just, 2,200 square feet, which is nothing in today's standards of, 60 to 80,000 square foot grocery stores. But it served a community. It had 2 gas pumps. It had a little, 6-foot meat counter and 8-foot produce and dairy counter, and the groceries that would keep you from having to go to town if you didn't want to. And of course, those little country grocery stores started dying when the convenience of driving and other grocery stores, bigger Kroger's and all this other stuff started coming into their markets. Those started struggling, and so anyway, I saw it as kind of a heritage restoration. This community needs it,
Mm-hmm.
and I needed it, and So it was just kind of a perfect pairing for me just to get some energy out after selling my grocery stores and kind of resetting. And
Did it feel like a risk at the time, or was it like you said, kind of a hobby? But did it feel like, okay, this is a big risk?
it became a risk. Yeah.
Mm.
At the time, I had a little money selling the grocery stores, and I sold three and closed one. So I had a little money, and so we ended up, buying the business, and then poured our money into it, trying to make it work. And it took a good about 6 years for us to really get
Okay.
it to where it got traction. And so it went from being a hobby to, I need to figure this out, or I'm going to use all our savings, and my wife's going to look at me one morning and say, "What the heck have you gotten us into?" So when we were
Now
just
was
about at
Jan
that point,
was Jan
yes,
working with you as well?
well, Jan and I can't work together. We found
Okay.
that out. Yeah, we love each other
uh,
dearly, but
I love it.
when we were in the grocery business, I say she was fired twice and quit once. She says she quit twice and was fired once.
I think that's a book title right there. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's great. So, so talk again. You've told me the story before, but folks that don't know, you had kind of a, if I remember correctly, a pretty precious exchange with the family that was named Pucketts when you bought it from them.
Yeah, so because I knew Leon, I contacted Leon and I said, listen, the business was starting to click, and I started to feel like maybe this is going to be something that could be, worth something at some point in time. And so I had called Leon and I said, I'd love for you to bring the family out, enjoy a meal, see what we've done, and then I'd like to ask his it was his aunt at the time, but asked the matriarch of the family. I'd like to ask her if I could continue the Puckett's name, and so that's they came out, had a meal, and when I asked that question, she just cried. It meant so much to her that despite all that they had been through as a family trying to run these community grocery stores, that somebody wanted to keep it up and keep it alive as Puckett's. And and I just, from my standpoint, I thought, people would give directions by the location. Know where Puckett's at. Where you go to Puckett's and a mile past it, you take a right. And I just could not imagine changing the name. I felt like it was too much about me if I changed the name, and I wanted it to be about the location and not about me. So,
For folks that haven't been into a Puckett's, it's a very warm experience.
mhm.
And the way Cracker Barrel has a consistent look and feel, Puckett's has a very consistent look and feel. But you walk in, there's that combination of, there's a bank of drinks and a refrigerator there, and there's a countertop there, and there's wood floors and kind of mismatched furniture, and it just feels like this is a comfortable place to sit down and have a breakfast or a cup of coffee or a meat and three. Or I mean, was that part of the original store, or was that your handprint later on?
Yeah, so that was the idea, was to make it feel like a mom and pop grocery store, that you had to push everything to the four walls in order to make it work. And the only way you can make it work was by serving good home cooked meals. And that's what we started in Leapers Fork. And we were trying to figure out, Leapers Fork was still serving a community with some groceries and things, but could we translate that into another location and have that same feel? And Franklin was our first shot at it. And so we took the old bicycle shop. It was probably even before your time, but Puckett's was a bicycle shop, and then it became City Grocery, which was supposed to be, kind of probably before its time for Franklin, but a cool concept of gourmet foods. And we took that and said, can we give that same feel of Leapers Fork here in Franklin? And here we are some 20 years later, and it has done that, and it did in Nashville, and it did in Columbia, and so it's just been a great model for us. But it's intentional, made to feel unintentional. if that makes sense.
Well, I think the first time I went to the one in Franklin, I was overwhelmed how busy it was. It was like you can't get in this place if you don't get there early.
Yeah.
And every time I go in that area, I'm always amazed. And you got a little small area outside, but that's always the coveted spots when the weather's nice. And it's always got a line, and Sunday lunch, good luck getting into a Pucketts.
Yeah, well, yeah, I often tell people I'll never apologize for being too busy.
There you go. There you go. Talk a little bit about how you keep your faith in a business world like this. Now, Middle Tennessee is a little more, let's say, friendly than
Yeah.
some places in the country. But even that, being a believer in Christ, the way you hire people, the way you have to manage and let people go. Talk a little bit about that.
It's important to be true to yourself, and I don't know any other way to run my business, and people will challenge you on that, people that will look at you and tell you one way or another, try to skew you one way or another. They either think you need to be overly Christian with everything and your business should be, you should have Bible verses on your walls or whatever, or they'll be, hey, you're a fraud. You're not truly a Christian because you're open on Sunday. And, I've always let the business have its own identity from the standpoint it's apolitical. It doesn't have conscience, so it doesn't have politics. It's a business serving a community. I, as the owner or a head of it, I have to be true to myself. And so in that, I've got to insert myself into that business and I've got to insert my own values. And sometimes there's conflicts there, but I'll always err on the side of what feels right and doing the right thing. And, sometimes that ruffles other people's feathers, but, you know, um, being a Christian is who I am, and serving a community, I think, is part of who I am and what our mission is. And I tell you, when we got now close to 500 employees, and um, our business is a mission field. Yeah, I work with all walks of life. I work with people that need a fresh start. I work with people that are transitioning into other jobs. In the meantime, they just need to make money. And I work with people, this is their career, and they got to feed their family on what they make. And so, knowing that and knowing that I can have some influence on their lives by praying for them, by being consistent in my faith with them, that they don't see a different person away from work than they see at work, that the same person is going to be there consistently there. And most challenges that I get are usually from non-Christians. It's from people that have drawn a hard line for whatever reason in their life. But I find if I just consistently love them and consistently have the same message to them, that eventually they find their way to soften their hearts a little. And if we can just crack the door a little bit, give God a way in, just like He did in my life. It's, if you can just give Him just a little space in your heart, He'll do the rest. So I just feel like that's who we are, and that's what we're about. Now I try to surround myself with like thinking minds, but not every hire, particularly, even in our upper management, not everybody thinks and acts as I do. Sometimes that's revealed over time, and sometimes it's hidden from me, at the beginning. But truly, some of the hardest departures have been because we just don't see eye to eye, and I'm not running my business that way, and I'm not going to compromise on my values to make a dollar or push people to their limits when I know that it's the backbone of our people that I'm successful. It's not my efforts that have made me successful. It's I've hired good people, and over time, they've helped me be successful. So culture in our business is really not about brick and mortar. It's all about people. So
when, again, for folks that haven't visited a Puckett's or the New Deacon South, when you walk in, it's very, very common to see someone, or maybe more than one person, on a stool with a guitar, and maybe you have a little merch there. My good friend Rob Harris loves playing at Pucketts whenever he gets an opportunity, and many others. And these guys don't have to do it, but it's like, I get to play music and that I love, and sometimes it's background noise, but it's an interesting. It's kind of like Buc-ee's. However they figured out what they did, Andy Marshall figured out I need somebody playing live music in my restaurants.
Yeah, so that really started back in the Leipers Fork in the community. We were surrounded around talented songwriters and artists, and we had to figure out some way to make Leipers Fork a destination. The food was good, the service was good. It's a cool community, but how do we get people to drive in from Belmead or Brentwood or to Leipers Fork? And so music was kind of the catalyst of that. And then it got so entrenched into who we were everywhere we go. We just announced Hendersonville, and somebody was asking me what made you choose Hendersonville. I said it's got a rich music history, and I just think it's a great fit for us. But then we go to Coleman, Alabama, and we think music's not that enriched in history there, but we get there and find out, gosh, there's all kinds of songwriters and musicians that live in Huntsville and Coleman and Birmingham, and just looking for a place to play. So, I don't know. Music is it's not the smartest business model because your tables don't turn when people are sitting and listening to music. But it has somehow God has blessed us through it all, and it has become who we are, what we do, and it's I don't know. I've built some great relationships with the music community and people I would have never met had we not chosen this path. So I love it. I enjoy it, and I love what it brings to our communities that we serve.
It is kind of an interesting concept because unless you're like a big name artist, those guys can barely make a living anymore. And for them, they really love to play. They love to use that gift and skill more than they want to be rich or whatever. And I'm thinking through a whole roster of my friends that would play, and they go, we just love to play. And again, if you got some young kid that comes up and watching someone playing a violin or a guitar, or in some cases you have a family, you have like a trio, and it's like they're enamored by that. And who knows, that person might say, hey, I want to learn how to play the guitar or play the fiddle or whatever. So that's you can't put a dollar on that, can you?
No, I'll tell you one of my favorite stories was, I had this songwriter that had been begging and asking, can I play? And it wasn't that we didn't want him on stage. It's just that we were booked out so far. And I kept saying, he was new to the community. And I kept saying, yeah, if we do it in the round. So if you can get 2 or 3 other musicians, artists, songwriters to play with you, we'll put something together. And so I put it together, and he calls me and he says, hey, I think I got Vince Gill coming too. And I said, well, that's good. That's a good person to bring. He said, but we can't put it on the playbill because, he may not be able to show up. And he said, just don't promote it. But if I can make it, I'll make it. And I said, okay. Well, lo and behold, Vince Gill does come and he plays. And at the end of the night, this is back when we were paying them about $100 an artist to play on the stage. And I'm looking at this $100 in my hand, and I'm looking at Vince Gill, and I'm thinking, this is kind of embarrassing to have to walk up and offer Vince Gill $100 for just playing music. And he is so sensitive, right? So as I'm walking up to him, he's doing his head like, no, give him the money. I thought, man, how intuitive he was, knowing that I was a nervous wreck having to go up and give Vince Gill $100 for playing at Pucketts. But what was beautiful about the night is he stayed because people, wanted his autograph and everything, and he was so patient and loving to everybody. But then after everybody left, he sat down with our servers and he rolled silverware with them and told stories. And I thought that night would have never ended because everybody didn't want it to end. But he sat there and for an hour and a half just told stories and said, he's rolling silver, fork, knife, spoon, he's going through it and repeating it. It was just a beautiful night. But that's the kind of community we live in. You know that.
Third and Lindsley downtown. Cindy and I used to frequent there, and he was a regular. I think every Monday night for a long time. And again, he wasn't always there, but he's just a normal guy. Middle Tennessee has been pretty kind to the the famous people, and left them alone, but also, hey, I like your stuff, And anyway, but it's been lively. Now, you mentioned Boys and Girls Clubs, and that's all over your kind of resume, CV, Vita story, your involvement with that, and obviously it helped you as a boy. Tell me about that going forward, because you've been very involved with them.
Well, it was kind of reintroduced to me. I got busy married and raising kids and doing life, and quite frankly, I had not dealt with my past for a long time. And it was Jan that kind of helped me deal with some of that, building a relationship back with my mother and some things that had to happen. But I didn't tell my story for a long time because I didn't want to hurt my mother's feelings. I didn't want to, somebody said, you need to write a book. And I was like, gosh, if I write this book and, it's just going to tear my mother apart. And, no, I don't want to do that. Well, she passed, and when she passed, we of course made a lot of amends before she passed, but we had some really good conversations towards the end of her life, and it was freeing. It was just like the Bible tells us. Just even if she can't say the words, you say the words. Just say, I forgive you, and I hope you forgive me for whatever part I had in it. And so we had some freedom in that, and so then the Boys and Girls Club kind of got reintroduced out of that freedom of, starting to talk about it or starting to share my story. And I realized, gosh, the Boys and Girls Club had a bigger part in my story than I've given them credit for. And so we bought the Columbia location and started a business there. And the director there in the Boys and Girls Club came in and spoke to me, and I thought, this is it. This is the time for me to give back to an organization that did so much for me, even though it was, on the peripheral. They did do a lot for me, grounded me and given me some foundation. So I started working with what was then the Murray County Boys and Girls Club. Now it's the South Central Boys and Girls Club, as they've grown and have taken on more communities. And then Middle Tennessee calls me and asks me if I could be a part of their story and do a video for them on their 150 years, the oldest Boys and Girls Club in America. And so I got to share my story with them and how big of a part Boys and Girls Club was with me. So it's just kind of grown, but it really kind of grew out of me being able to find freedom and forgiveness and deal with the things I had not dealt with. I just had kind of put it all in a box, put it behind me, and was just going to be a different person. But I never really dealt with it until close to my mother's death, and I started telling the story. And so anyway, that's how it came about. I wish I had realized that a long time ago, because I've certainly enjoyed being around the Boys and Girls Club and the kids and the difference they're making in these young people's lives. It's just amazing.
Did you ever have any further contact with that police officer?
No, and that's been asked of me several times. As a matter of fact, told the story at a Boys and Girls Club event in Nashville, and somebody from Memphis contacted me and said, boy, we'd love to help you find. And I said, I got no contacts whatsoever. I mean, I was probably 11 at that time, 10 and a half maybe, and I just got so much of that.
How would you even start? Yeah.
But I would have. It'd been a great story if I could have ever remembered. But no.
Well, that's the Lord knows who He is, right? And I think these are all part of the the eternality of heaven. When we get there, we're going to find out all kinds of backstories of things we never understood while we were, doing X and Y.
We didn't realize it touched us.
Yeah, exactly. It's also interesting to hear, because again, men can compartmentalize and work ethic can carry us, but
Yeah.
but there was a time you said, at Jan's provocation, it sounded like I need to kind of think through some of this.
And not dealing with it probably kept me from being a better husband at one point in our life. Not, because I may have been short or snapped on things that I didn't really know, or she didn't understand why I was short or snapping about. And I probably didn't realize it until I thought, gosh, she's touching something there that I haven't dealt with. And so dealing with it, you get it out in the open and you start dealing with it, then all of a sudden it doesn't bother you anymore. If somebody touches that nerve, it's like, yeah, no big deal. So, Jan was a big part in helping me deal with a lot of that stuff. And for a long time, I didn't tell her my story. She was probably the first person I shared it with. And then later on, it's become easier and easier to share that story.
Wow. Well, we appreciate you talking about it a little bit. Give me any Marshall's 2 or 3 business lessons, because there's probably some, we hear the word entrepreneurial a lot in this community, and whenever I hear it, I go, everybody has a different definition, and we can talk about tenacity and hard work and risk and vision, but you've undoubtedly got 2 or 3 isms that you follow and live by.
The motto that I often will end with on a salutation to my employees and things is, never let good get in the way of great. I've always kind of been driven that way. I was undersized, too slow athlete in high school, but they couldn't keep me out of the lineup because I just had such grit and determination and leadership and all these things that, sometimes sort of the intangibles people talk about with people. A lot of that came from my past and just, refusing to give in to, the environment around me and try to overcome the environment. But I've always loved that saying, never let good get in the way of great. And, good's never been good enough for me. I always thought if I could do this, then I can do better. I can do better. And so, the other thing is I always tell people it's a process. You don't wake up one morning great at something. It's a process, and you got to be patient with the process, which is a great thing to remind myself when I'm trying to bring along other people in our business or mentoring people, is that I can't expect you to be to think like I do and make the decisions that I make without you making a few mistakes along the way. And so, I always tell people it's a process, and be patient with the process. I'll be patient if you are, but we got to learn from our mistakes, and we got to do better.
Last question: as you look back over, your life and God's blessing, and what would you say was like the defining moment for Andy Marshall?
Oh, well, I think, if you had to write down some defining moments, for me, it was walking in the doors at Southland Baptist Church in my elephant ear bell bottoms and my best T-shirt, and just seeking, just saying I've got to take a step to figure something better out for my life. And that pastor, seeing a young boy waiting out a rainstorm and coming up to me and saying, "Hey, do you need a ride?" And I said, "No, my parents are going to come pick me up," knowing that I had about 14 blocks to walk, and it was a driving Memphis storm. And he sensed it, and he said, "Why don't I just take you home?" And he did. And then they said, "Why don't I pick you up tonight for Sunday night service?" And he did. And then the next week he said, "I'm going to do a baptism next week. Would you like to be baptized?" So, yeah, so that walking in Southland Baptist Church, and it's truly the defining moment of my life. It's when I gave my life to Christ, and I just said, no longer am I going to look for things in all the wrong places. I'm just going to trust in one.
Andy Marshall Hospitality, almost 500 employees. How many restaurants total now, Andy?
We've got 12 with 13 coming.
13 on the way, and your daughter's making ice cream?
Yeah, Hetty James Creamery.
Hetty James Creamery, and when you come to Middle Tennessee, you must needs check out Pucketts for breakfast and make a reservation for Deacon's New South, because you'll need it to get in, and it'll be one of the finest steaks you've ever had. So, Andy, thanks for your friendship. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Dr. E. Great talking to you.